Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Dan Hornacek with the Leading on the Frontlines podcast. Excited to be back. Today, we've got kind of an interesting episode. But first, I just want to thank everybody. We've had a lot of downloads on the podcast, so it's exciting to see the growth and see that more people are listening, and hopefully you guys are taking something away from it. Again, for those who are just listening to for the first time, this is a podcast kind of dedicated to below surface level topics on leadership and management, but branching out a little further into more personal aspects of just leadership kind of as a whole, and what kind of encompasses that, challenges that come with that, things like that. So one of my goals is not make it do these 5 things to be a great leader. It's more so to break down some fundamental topics and things on leadership and whatnot. So again, if you like the podcast, want to get a little more involved, see a little more content, we are active on, or I am active on Instagram, X, YouTube. The Instagram and YouTube handles same as this podcast, Leading on the Front Lines. So look me up there. Follow, subscribe. Comment would be awesome. Like the post that you get something from. We're also on X, and the handle on that is just Leading the Front. So feel free to follow me there. I engage quite a bit and post multiple times per day on X. Instagram is more of a once per day type deal. And last week, I'm not sure if anyone saw, but I started a weekly blog. So I'm going to be posting weekly blog posts on numerous little topics, and more so tips and tricks. This first blog post was about how to not have terrible meetings at work. So we're going to talk about that in a podcast episode, but I'm going to save that for another day. But definitely check that out, and there's a link on my Instagram. Again, Leading on the Front Lines on Instagram. There's a link to my blog as well. So check that out. Let me know. Would love to hear feedback from you guys. So last week, to kind of get into everything here, we talked about what do you stand for as a leader. So if you haven't listened to that episode, it's pretty cool. Just kind of talking about your personal mission statement, what your values are, kind of how to evaluate yourself into figuring out those values, how it plays at work and at home, and things like that. So I enjoyed talking about that. But today, I thought we would talk about something that kind of goes along with it from a value principle, but kind of. And if you are following my Instagram, you saw my post today about what happened, right? So what was the catalyst moment in which you became a leader, right? Because we can talk all day long about being at work and being in a management position or a leadership role, but typically, right, people who are in those roles not just like at work. They're leaders in their home, they're leaders in their peer group, within their families. They're typically the person who's going to be the go-to, or the one who answers questions for people, or is the person that people rely on. And so you don't need to be a manager, right? You don't need to be, and this is kind of like taking a little rabbit hole off of, the premise of the podcast, but I think it's a key piece to people who are leaders at work. And I think that, it's an important piece to talk about. So I'm going to talk about me, right? So it's just me talking most of the time here. So the catalyst for me was November 1st, 2003. I was a senior in high school, and so October 31st, Halloween, we're coming into the spooky season as it is. I decided to go hang out with some friends and skip some school on that day to go hang out with friends. And that next day when I got home, I was kicked out of the house subsequently. So 17 years old, still in school. I was working part-time at a grocery store. I was a stock boy at a grocery store. And this is in the Chicagoland area. So there I was. It was November 1st. It was in the morning, before lunchtime. I had gone home to, just because I was done hanging out with my friends. and my mom was there, which because it was Saturday, and she had asked me where I was. Everything that a mother would do, not knowing that she had seen that I had come home during school. So anyway, so I had gotten kicked out of the house at 17. Nowhere to go, really, nothing. I had no money. I had nothing, and that when you walk out of the door, right, of what you called home to nothing, it really sends a message to you that this is all on you at this point. You're really taking a step from, because again, I was 17, so late teens, and now it was kind of a scary thing. Where do I go? What do I do? And I think for me, that was my catalyst moment. I ended up sleeping at a park that evening because I had nowhere to go, and I ended up sleeping in a park for about like 5 or 7 days in a tube slide, and then my buddy's mom let me rent out a room in her house. So still going to school, still working, and at that point, being an adult at 17, not really prepared for it, but making it happen. So this isn't a story to talk about to be sad or to pity me on. I think, although it was very difficult, focusing on survivability and figuring out strategic moves on what I needed to do in order to still make it to school on time, still get to work. I didn't have a car, so I couldn't drive anywhere. And again, this is the Chicagoland, the Chicago suburbs, so there's a lot of traffic and things like that. So it was difficult. It was very difficult, and I think that for me, especially that next year, really got my mind in a position to start thinking like, well, at least a manager, right? I was able to schedule. I was able to think ahead many steps. I was able to do kind of the mental gymnastics of where am I going to eat today. When I say where, I don't mean a fast food restaurant. I mean, am I going to be able to eat today? So, even though it was a very short period of time, being homeless for a week is a very eye-opening experience. You understand what hunger really is, right? And I think all of these things specifically play into again that strategy piece of management, and that was for me, right? I think we all have, if we really think about it, kind of that catalyst moment, like I mentioned before, of this is what happened to where, yeah, I'm going through the motions at work and whatnot. Because it's not like that happened and I became a manager the next year or something like that. It was actually about 3 years before I took my first management position. Well, maybe 2 years. It doesn't really matter. But, I had ended up moving to Michigan and working as a dairy manager at a grocery store. So, I think that looking back and being able to strategize and figure out my life and figure out getting an apartment, just all the stuff that I think a lot of us take for granted now. But if you put yourself in the shoes of the time, right, it was difficult to figure out, especially the first time. That allowed me to have the skill set to be able to interview for a management position confidently and ultimately get that job. So, I think that the things that happen in our lives shape us to be, obviously the people who we are in the future. But as far as for this podcast, I think it'd be a really cool thing to hear and to see what your guys' stories is. Mine, I've been told, is a little bit more dramatic, if you will, than others. But, I think that it gives you that momentum, right? I think the trials and tribulations that we deal with within our lives give us that momentum to make decisions, to understand what suffering is, understand what it is to, set goals and achieve them, set goals and fail. Right? I mean, certainly there's a lot of periods of time in which going through that for me that I failed. Right? There's a lot of times that I wasn't able to eat. There was a lot of like the grocery store that I worked at when I was still living in the Chicagoland area. I went for a team lead role and I didn't get it. It's safe to say that I just didn't have the experience and things like that. I was just 18, fresh at that point, fresh out of high school and things like that. So it's safe to say that I would be one of the last picks in that scenario. But to be able to sit there and be defeated, right, and to have that decision looming in front of you of I can either be bitter, right, and I can be angry, and which I was, but I could be angry, and I can go down the rabbit hole of it's everybody else's fault. Instead, it's kind of like you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you decide, you know what, I'm not good enough. Right? This is that self-reflective piece that we've talked about numerous times over the last few episodes. Where do I fall short? And not from the perspective of like, I'm going to dwell in the fact that I'm falling short, but more so like, where do I fall short? And is this something that I need to focus on improving so the next time that this opportunity comes, I will have a better chance of becoming a manager or, whatever, taking on another position, becoming a team lead, whatever the circumstance may be. So again, I think that the catalyst moment, again, for me was probably, looking back, one of the more difficult times of my life. And, I don't necessarily want to say I'm thankful for it, right? I'm sure life could have been a lot easier because it wasn't as though it was just like a week long. It was since I was 17. That's just been my life. But I think it's really put me in a position, again, to kind of summarize, to learn how to strategize my next moves, to think about pros and cons and decision making, to be able to play out different scenarios and how they're going to work or won't work. And especially from like a failure perspective, it's kind of cliche. A lot of people talk about how you can learn from failure, but it's very true. And I'm living proof of that because when you fail, you have that choice. Like I just was talking about of, you can dwell, you can blame, you could be embarrassed, right? That's a real thing. There's a lot of emotions with failure, and I don't think a lot of people talk about them. Failure is not an easy place to come from, and the term cringe, which is really big right now. Whenever I think of that word or see that word on social media, the way I feel is I think about my past failures, like I was there interviewing and I didn't get the job or what have you. And that was cringy, right? It was embarrassing. So I think, we should reflect, right? Let's think about what was, again, just to kind of summarize, what was the catalyst moment in your life that happened in which you, at that moment, were like, now looking back, of course, we're like, that is when my journey with being a leader, regardless if it's at work, your friend group, etc., that's when it began. That was when I had to make hard choices. That's when I had to sacrifice, right? And I think it's a good opportunity when you're self-reflecting and things like that to be a little grateful for it. Not in the sense, like I mentioned before, of I'm happy it happened, right? If it was a negative experience. I hope most of you have a positive catalyst experience of this happened, and I felt so empowered that it made me want to teach people or lead people or cultivate experiences for other things like that. That is phenomenal, and I hope that's the case for the majority of you. But I think that regardless, positive or negative, I think it's an important piece to think about and just kind of sit in and be grateful for that eye-opening experience. So a little more insight into me as far as my past and where I've come from. But I think that, thinking about, what made us go from employee to wanting to be or becoming a manager, leader within the workplace, I think that's something we should think about often, and we should be proud of ourselves. So again, that's today's episode. And don't forget to check me out on Instagram and X and YouTube. Again, YouTube and Instagram, Leading on the Front Lines. If you want to check me out on X, it's just Leading the Front. So please subscribe to my blog. Go on my Instagram. There's a link on my bio for the blog. Please subscribe. It'll be weekly. It'll automatically come to your email you subscribe with. And excited to kind of get that going and have a little more candid writing on just different tips and topics that I think about for everyone in the workplace. So again, this is Dan Hornacek, Leading on the Front Lines. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and look forward to chatting with you guys on social media. Take care.